Welcome to The Real Thomas Jefferson, episode 26. Wow,
Moving
26
along, aren't we?
episodes.
And I
Okay,
am at
yeah, moving right along.
fifth
There's just,
pavilion at UVA, by the way. It's a nice, sunny, warm day.
oh, I like it. I
I
like
move
it.
around a lot. See the Ionian columns over there, too?
I like your new house. Okay, so Colonel Holacek, also known as Dr. Holacek, has written much on Jefferson's educational views. He has consistently argued that most scholars who write on Jefferson's educational views fail to contextualize them with respect to his robust political philosophy. Actualization of Jefferson's vision of republicanism is dependent upon actualization a system of educational reform in which there are levels of education to accommodate all members of citizenry. The most important echelon being general education for the masses. I can't wait to hear what you have to say about this.
Always good to talk about those masses, isn't it?
Well, lately I've been wondering because I think our public education system really needs an overhaul with how we do things because times have changed and we need to work with what we have now instead of trying to fit a square peg into a round hole anyway. So the aim of this show, The Real Thomas Jefferson, is to get real about Thomas Jefferson. To get what about Thomas Jefferson?
I guess real. You're in a polemical mood today, huh?
Oh boy. Okay, I'll have to look that up.
Okay, I'll leave it.
So the aim is to get real about Thomas Jefferson. In other words, to revisit and revise the revisionists who are ever in the business of deconstructing Jefferson's prose, his letters, addresses, memos, etc. Nearly all Jeffersonian biographers today take it upon themselves to write of Jefferson's protean nature or Janus facedness. What Jefferson says most often cannot be understood literally. His prose must be deconstructed, and so intuitiveness and knack are needed in preference to logical acumen. It is commonplace to call the man a hypocrite and even a contradiction. This show then aims to dispel that myth. Jefferson can be known, and logic, not intuitive and discretionary deconstruction, is the method. And and speaking of contradiction, I think my last question is going to ask that. Anyway, so
are we starting with the last question first?
No, I know. Well, I really have
something novel.
I think I'm going to switch up the question.
Let it go. Instead of going sequentiously, we're going to start with the last question, then work our way to the first question.
Yeah, we're just going to flip that triangle upside down. Okay, so I'm Donna Vitek, and this is The Real Thomas Jefferson, episode 26.
I think, right? Yeah.
Yes, 26. Okay, so the first question I have is, what was the general state of education in Thomas Jefferson's day?
Well, that was part of the problem. And I've argued that, the state of education in Virginia during Jefferson's day was part of the problem and really helped shape Jefferson's Republican views, his political thinking, his political philosophy, because as we'll show as the show goes on, and I've argued in my book on Thomas Jefferson's philosophy of education, that Jefferson's philosophy of education and his political philosophy go hand in glove, right? You can't, I mean, if you're going to talk about reforming the political situation so that we have an argument, we have government of and by the people, by elected representatives, you have to have educational changes, educational reforms to get that off the ground. And Jefferson realized that fully. In the present day Virginia of his time was an illustration of the backwardness of the educational situation. Now, the Brewster, the well-to-do, the people of quote unquote of good blood as well, had access to education. there would be private tutors in the house to teach, or private schools to which the wealthy could go, where Jefferson was one instance, right? When he was at Reverend Maury's place, where he was educated, met some of his young friends, and he was, taught the rudiments of a good education, Greek and Latin and things like that. So the people of wealth, the Brewster, would always be taken care of, right? So they were, the private students for them. Now the people, the masses, the hoi polloi, really had no recourse to education at all, other than perhaps Sunday school education. By that meaning, at a local church, there might be teaching instruction in the Bible, as well as some reading and writing that going on, and maybe even some arithmetic, some basic skill stuff. But obviously, once a week doesn't help a whole heck of a lot. It's better than nothing. And not all churches offer that services, or chapels off of that services. So there was no general education for the masses. They were, how do I want to put it? They were under the power of the well-to-do, right? So you had a system that was like in England and France, of self-perpetuating. The children of the Brewster, the children of the well-to-do, would be the ones who would run the system politically and whatever economically, because they were the ones who were educated. So you just continue, you'd have the same bloodlines running things over and over. And Jefferson's republicanism was an illustration of why that needed to change. Remember, we talked about with John Adams, Jefferson's view of the natural versus the artificial aristocracy. Adams argued that, the well-to-do, the people of good blood and money, and even handsome people, are always going to run things. And Jefferson says, well, no, that's the artificial aristocracy. The actual aristocracy are people of genius, of natural intelligence, and people of good moral upbringing. We need to get those people running things. But they're not going to surface from the masses, from the many, unless there's certain opportunities for them to have access to quality education early on. Right. So, and if we want the wealthy people who went to upper level education at a place like William and Mary was predominantly an education in Anglicanism, say prayers in the morning, go to mass, so there would be a lot of introduction to the Anglican religion, and a smattering of other things you needed to know. You do philosophy and other sorts of things, but there's predominantly religious instruction. And Jefferson realized that needed to. I'll read a quote here. Jefferson says, "We have no interest nor passions different from those of our fellow citizens. We have the same object, the success of representative government, nor are we acting for ourselves alone, but for the whole human race." This is an experiment, he's saying, that we're undertaking not only in Virginia, but in America, to change the system. And if it works, it has implications, thinks Jefferson, for the whole human race. The event of our experiment is to show whether man can be trusted with self-government. The eyes of suffering humanity are fixed on us with anxiety as their only hope. And on such a theater, for such a cause, we must suppress all smaller passions and local considerations. The leaders of federalism say that man cannot be trusted with his own government. We must do no act which shall replace them in the direction of the experiment. We must not, by any departure from principle, disgust the mass of our fellow citizens who have confided to us this interesting cause. So we have an experiment in representative government of and by the people, and we need to do everything to facilitate that. And part of facilitating that, educating the general citizenry.
Okay. Wasn't it Jefferson who thought that it was going to take an educated citizenry to keep the government in check from becoming tyrannical?
Oh, absolutely. He was not the only one who thought that, but he emphasized that perhaps more than anybody else.
Right. So education is important, if not for that, just that in itself.
Right. Yeah, I mean,
what good is it if you know how to build rockets if you don't know how your government runs, and you can't keep your government from destroying the constitutional republic?
Yeah, I mean, on one hand, he thought the average person, all people had the same moral sense, so we can all know right and wrong and see right or wrong. But of course, government officials could be hiding their duplicitous actions behind a sort of veil, and
Right.
the moral sense is not going to be effectual. And you need a little bit of education, smattered education, to pull the curtain so you can see behind and see what they're doing. So you're right.
Yeah. Okay. What we have okay. This takes us to the next question.
You have flying books.
You like my, yeah, I thought, oh, I'll do that
I-
between questions. You don't like it?
Special effects there. We have,
Yeah.
you have books on your shelf and back, and now you have flying books.
It's boring just looking at me and you, both of us. So, I thought we
I don't know. I've got Pavilion 5. You could, people could just marvel at the architectural, call it an oddity as you want, but it's sort of amazing. It's quite beautiful, but all right.
Okay, so you, Colonel Holochek, more than anyone else, has emphasized the need to understand the relationship between Jefferson's political philosophy and his educational philosophy, that is, educational reforms. As you mentioned, there was no system of education in his day, and Jefferson was proposing to systemize education. So just what was the system that Jefferson was advocating?
So as I said before, we had nothing really for the masses. And we're trying to build representative government, Jefferson Republicanism, which takes as base the opinions of the masses, right? The majority of opinion from the mass of people, all people being treated equally, no people being better than others. And so you needed to reform the system. I mean, all we had really was the wealthy had access to education. So Jefferson was proposing in all respects taxation at the state level for reform of the system so that we have general education. Now he comes up with two bills, one in 1776, as if he didn't have anything else to do. He sat down with four other people and rewrote the laws of Virginia, 126 bills to send through the Virginian Congress, most of which did not pass, but they rewrote most of the bills to make them more modern and accessible and understandable, one of which was Bill 79. Bill 80 also was related. Bill 79 was a bill for the more general diffusion of knowledge, and it had many layers. But as the title suggests, for the more general diffusion of knowledge, the main intent of the bill was to educate the masses, to make sure they had elementary education easily accessible, and that would be government funded. And he does another bill in 1817, roughly to the same effect. Neither one passes. But his general scheme is we're going to have ward schools, right? We're going to have grammar schools, he calls them colleges as well, and we're going to have, a university, a large university, something like that for every state. So in Virginia, you have William and Mary. Let's work our way from the top down. In the center, William and Mary is on the eastern part of Virginia. That won't do because of its location. It needs to be centrally located. And Jefferson argues that it needs to be, and he gets his way, that University of Virginia is built roughly in the middle of Virginia somewhere. Then you break down Virginia into counties, and every county you would have a grammar school or college, right, where people from the lowest levels go to if they want more education. And then within counties, you'd have what he called, in one sense, hundreds, because he thought you could break a county into 100 different little wards, or each a 100th of a unit. Imagine it being 10 miles by 10 miles, and if you have a 1 square mile ward or unit, you can have a school in that, a a ward school for general education. Now, at the lowest level, in his bill for more general diffusion of knowledge, he says, every 5 to 6 square miles. Elsewhere, he says 10 square miles. Now, obviously, trying to carve up into squares a state like Virginia is not an easy matter. You have to take populational density into consideration. Areas with population is more dense, areas where it's less dense, and so forth. So I'm just throwing that up. A ward school would be for young men and young women, and would teach you reading, writing, general math skills. The idea is just to get you through everyday life. Just like today, you go to the grocery store, you have a grocery list, and you have $100 to spend. Ha, I laugh. Who can get by with $100? You've got $1,000 to spend. I hyperbolize it. But imagine you have a couple $100 to spend, and you've got to buy for the household, and you need certain goods. You have to be able to add and subtract. You have to be able to check your bill to make sure no one cheated you and things like that. So you need addition, subtraction, reading, and writing to get you by so that you can be self-sufficient. Mm-hmm. Each ward, all the wards together in a county would be sort of united in the county by a grammar school where you would learn different languages, notably Greek, Latin, maybe Italian, French, other languages. The idea being, I'll hold on to that. Then at the other level, you have something like the University of Virginia or William and Mary. Jefferson secularizes University of Virginia. He lets education be elective. It's open school that's very much modeled after his political philosophy, after how he thinks government should run. He thinks the institution shouldn't be top heavy. The students themselves should dictate what they're going to learn and how they're going to learn it and have a lot of input. Okay, so the middle, the grammar schools, I've argued Jefferson sort of like they were a puzzle for him, in my estimation. He didn't really know. He knew that some people would want to go from the ward schools all the way to, say, University of Virginia. How do you get there? But you can't just jump there. There needs to be intermediate level of education where the rational faculty is maturing. So you might as well learn different languages because they're easy to learn while your rational faculty is maturing, number one. And secondly, you can learn moral lessons. Not that there's need of moral instruction. There isn't. We know what's right or wrong. But reading the right sort of stories encourages us to do the right thing, does it not?
Right.
Yeah. And lastly, I'll just throw out some general principles. Consistent with Jefferson's educational thinking, every person needs to get instructed according to her own need. Right. Males and females would be generally educated. So there's no exclusion of females, at least from the lower level. There was no religious instruction in the system, no moral instruction. No moral instruction because Jefferson says famously, state a moral case to a politician and a plowman. The plowman, in other words, the farmer person's been brainwashed by his education, and he thinks morality is something other than what we sense. There's no instruction in religion because Jefferson is always concerned that if to have religious instruction means to have instruction in one particular religion,
right?
Say Anglicanism, and then once you study that, if you're exposed to it early on, you're going to be a slave to it the rest of your life. You won't have exposure. And by the time your rational faculty matures and you can think critically, you really won't be able to free yourself and say, okay, I want something else. I want Protestantism of one kind.
Right.
So, and then as I said, there was elective education at the university. Those are some general principles.
What he didn't consider was sometimes you have to do damage control, meaning I understand his position, but then you also have to weigh the outcome of not having any religious instruction in the first 5 years of life and how that shapes or fails to shape.
Well, he's not talking about the first 5 years of life. I mean, all I'm trying to do is give you, I mean, that can be done at home by parents who want. He doesn't want schools.
Yeah,
Look, there's a separation of church and state.
right,
People are paying taxes for uh, these lower level schools.
right,
And if those lower level schools are going to be sanctioning one particular religion, that's a violation of church and state.
right,
It's the government telling you that this is the religion your child should be to which your child should be exposed. That's
right,
the right thing to do for Jefferson.
right, right,
Families can instruct kids in religion, but I'm
right.
saying personally, he thought he did not push religion off on his children or grandchildren early on because, as he says in his letter to Peter Carr in 1787, on August 10, that now's the time, you're old enough, now's the time to start reading the Bible and thinking about it and reading all different aspects of
Yeah,
it.
that's what I'm talking about, is that I would like to, I wish he were alive today so we could discuss that particular topic. Not about being taught in school, but just how he felt about waiting until someone was older. Because sometimes if you do that, it's too late once they're older, you know. Anyway, so okay,
Well,
let's move
I
on.
agree with them 100% on that
Yeah,
because
I
there are
don't.
thousands of different, well, you have a particular take. There are thousands of different religion. If you speak with certain religionists, each one is convinced that my religion is right and the other
I'm not talking about getting deep into religion. I'm talking about the basic principles that are taught across all religions.
Well, that's morality, and you already know that because you're born with a moral sense. If you read my book, American Messiah, the most general principles of religion are simply the most general principles of morality. They're not separable. Naturalized religion equals natural morality, right? All the other stuff you get, like Jefferson would say with angels and all this stuff is just sort of metaphysical window dressing that has nothing to do with teaching you the right sort of lessons. And he thought most good religions are religions that tell you the same things morally across the board. Love your fellow human being, love God, right? Things like that, and be charitable when you can. So
right. Yeah. So yeah, there are certain things that having children and notice and doing things differently with both children. I realized that when you want something to be ingrained in someone, you really have to start young.
Well, that's the problem for him. I mean, if you're putting the wrong stuff in.
Well, what if you're not putting the wrong stuff in, though? You're the parent.
How do you know that when it comes to, if you're talking about metaphysical, Jefferson worries about all the metaphysical trappings that come with religions, angels and life after death, and you expose people to all that, it can actually do a lot of harm later. That's what he thinks.
Yeah.
You don't have to buy in what he thinks, and I tend to agree with him, but that's what he thinks, and it's a delicate issue, and you do need to wait till people can think critically about these things. For gosh sakes, I taught college for over 30 years, and by the time you get students come in there to get into critical thinking, most of them had a hard time doing that because they're not used to. They're used to just being told this is what you do, this is how you think, or belonging to some group. And then when I try to convince them that it's a real good thing for you to think critically and think for yourself, that's a very uncomfortable feeling. That means you have to take ownership of your views. You have to think for yourself. You have to make your own decision and take responsibility for your actions. College level students, for the most part, don't want to do that. Some do. Good for them. But Jefferson takes religious and moral instruction very, very seriously.
Yeah.
And I'll add one thing really quickly. His own children and grandchildren did not know his religious views by the time of his death. They did not know what he thought because he did not shove them down other people's throats. And I thought that was pretty cool. I really do. I still do.
Okay. Okay. Next question. Just what was Jefferson's view of general education in Virginia? Why did, as you said, Colonel Hollowcheck, Jefferson consider it much more important than higher education?
We touched on this. I think you probably know the answer to this too from what we said. The wealthy already had access to education at all levels because they had wealth.
Mhm.
They could buy education.
Right.
And then we're trying to implement a system of a political philosophy or a political system that really tries to get the very best, the most intelligent and the most moral people incentives to run for the highest spots in government and to be teachers. To do that, to get the best, there are some people of high moral fabric and high intelligence. If not given any education, you're never going to know.
Right.
Right. So if you want the best, all people, in effect, Jefferson always argued that all people need to have the same starting point at birth, roughly speaking.
Mhm.
If I can have a situation where all citizens of a state, for example, have roughly the same starting point, roughly the same amount of money, and I say roughly, then it's up to you to make something of yourself or to fail to make something of yourself. If things don't work out well, it's on you because you were given an opportunity.
Well, yeah, we have that today. I mean, every community has a public school and a public library. I mean, almost everyone has access to the internet. Everyone has a smartphone if they don't have access to the internet.
But not everybody comes from roughly the same background vis-a-vis income. I'm not bringing in race or gender or anything here. It's just a fact. Jefferson really wanted, he even said for young Virginians, all Virginians, because of the large amount of land, should be given 50 acres of land. Land could be converted to money to start with. So he's trying to, and people who had 50 acres don't get anything. You don't need it because you already got it. But he wanted to give all people, he's basically talking about white males here, 50 acres of land so that you have an equal starting point. If you fail to do anything with that land, then it's on you. That was a start. And maybe he's chasing windmills like Don Quixote, right? Seeing windmills as giants, but that's what he wanted to do. His whole goal, in some sense, was to give every person an equal opportunity to make something of herself. And if you don't, I should say himself, because it's basically for males here. And if you don't make anything, then don't be, as the French say. It's on you.
Right. Well, I feel that way today.
It would be nice to do that if we could, Well, you talked about, we were talking about before the show, we live in a sort of welfare state where a lot of people are given incentives just to do nothing, monetary incentives. And that's not what Jefferson wanted. We need production. We need people that are working together. It's a John F. Kennedy thing. Work for the state, for the nation, for each other, right? It's like a team, a soccer team of females, professionals. And if one person sticks out and they don't play together, they're not going anywhere.
Right.
So everybody, he's not talking about welfarism or anything like that. He's talking about people understanding, like Plato said, that the system only works if everybody gives back, if everybody gives some time of himself or herself to make the thing work.
Right. Yep, it has to be that way.
Yeah, okay. And he says, comment on this if you want. He said, I don't remember to whom he was speaking or writing, that I would rather throw away the University of Virginia and have general education implemented than worry about higher education. So it was so important to his political philosophy to have the masses educated. It's easy to see, isn't it, that that's so important?
Well, we'll get to that not this question, but the next one. So why did Virginians not put into law Jefferson's views on educational reform, especially his views on general education?
Well, because the gentry opposed it. The well-to-do, which I call the wealthy, the Brewster.
Why? Because if everyone was educated, that they wouldn't be so special anymore?
I think that's part of it. Wouldn't you feel that way? Number one. Number two, because I'm already paying for my kids to get private education, and I'm not going to have my kids go to a ward school where the masses are going, because my kids are special. They're not going to go there. So in effect, you're taxing me to pay for other kids to get a general education. Well, my kids are going to go to private school. I have to pay twice. That's their thinking.
Yeah.
And in effect, you can understand what the wealthy people are thinking there. I'm not going to go into, I mean, we had this problem too with people. I mean, I went to Catholic school when I was young, and my parents wanted me to get a Catholic education or a certain type of education.
See what good that did.
What's that?
I said, see what good that did.
Yeah. What happened, right? But it just, the idea here is, back then back at that time, is a lot of people just thought the public schools weren't as good as private schools, where you might get religious instruction as well as a better education. Right. I went to Detroit Catholic Central High School, where I'm not religious at all, but I had a really good education there. I learned French and pre-calculus and a lot of things, and I'm really glad of my time there because I did have fine instruction. Not to say you couldn't get it in the public school system, you could, but I know I definitely got a really good education there.
Yeah. I see both sides of that coin as a taxpayer, and but I think in Florida we resolved that issue, I think, very well, because if you choose not to use the public education system, you can get a scholarship so that money can go towards whatever education you choose. So
I like that. Sensible, huh? Yeah.
I do. Especially being a taxpayer, so we have more of us. And at the time, I had children I had using the public school system, and then using alternative forms of education. I like having that that control as a taxpayer. Yeah.
You're a control freak. One
right.
of these days I'm going to put tobacco in this pipe and shock you in the world.
Oh my goodness. No tobacco. No. We're giving that a thumbs down.
I have to get some.
We gave
All right, where are we here?
The last question. Oh, and we only have 6 minutes. So let me get to the last question, because this is the most important one to me, because we talked about him being people claiming he is contradictory in his thoughts. But so if general education is so much more important than higher level education for Jefferson, then why did Jefferson not continue to fight for general education reform? Why did he instead turn to establishing the University of Virginia?
Is a Greek term, sentence oucheros, meaning the time is not right. Same reason he didn't work more towards eradication of slavery.
Yeah.
Because your watches are flying. We have plenty of time.
Oh, you said the time is not right. So
you're playing off my goodness. You're too clever for me. It's just everything going right over my head. Literally.
That's okay. You're old. I expect to have to explain things.
But you can work at something, and it made sense. And we'll do a show on kairos, the Greek conception that Jefferson appropriated, and no scholar in the world's ever talked about this with me, having been instructed in Greek. And it's a very important term that anyone studying early Greek culture would have been with which they would have been amply familiar. Adams, Jefferson, anybody who studied Greek culture. The time wasn't right. Aristotle says that right action is done by the right person at the right time for the right reason, for the right motive and so forth. Who, what, when, where, why. All those things it has to be done at the right. To do the right thing at the wrong time is to do the wrong thing. Now, to keep pushing for reform of general education and spending all one time when he could, as he did do, push through the University of Virginia, work on the upper tier, which wasn't as important to him. He knew he could get that done, or he believed he can get it done in his life, where the upper classes were not going to allow reforms, for allow for general education. They're not going to pay tax money to have state-funded institutions
Right.
which they would be, sanctioning or funding. That wasn't going to happen. So it's a rather simple answer. And when I use that answer for not doing more on slavery, no one likes that. But he was right. At the time wasn't right. It was a very divisive issue, slavery, just as general education was very divisive. And if you want to play around trying to fight for something when there's no chance of it happening in your lifetime, he realized, I'm wasting my time. I could get some stuff done. So he went for the university. Does that seem reasonable?
Yeah, I guess so. I'm trying to think of it in terms of housework. Sometimes I'll do something that's like, why did I, at the end of the day, like, why did I do that? Well, because the other thing would have taken too long and then I would have gotten nothing done. So at least I can account, so I get it. I'm trying to see things through his eyes. And for the most part, I do I do agree with the way he thinks of some things, not everything.
I'm not sure the housework analogy here resonates with me all that much.
I know.
I just put some suds on Jeffy and ask him to crawl around the floor and stuff like that a little bit to clean the floor.
Oh boy.
I'm teasing. I would never do that to my dear to me, but
oh god.
But if that works for you, but it just, there's certain things, morally correct action for Jefferson as it was for the Greek and Roman Athenians who were was a matter of doing the right thing at the right time for the right reasons.
I get, it's so funny that you mentioned that, you said that, because just last night I was attending a webinar by Gilder Lehrman Institute, and it was on the Douglas, Lincoln Douglas debate. And the professor was a phenomenal speaker and had me at the edge of my seat for the entire hour. I can't remember his name though, but he was talking about how Stephen Douglas was banking on, the founders the country was surviving with slavery from the founding of our country, and we made it this far. Why is it a big deal? And he said that was his demise, is he didn't understand the moral repugnance of slavery. And so just thinking of that, it just reminded me of that part of history as well. Anyway, so
we can do more got a minute and a half. We can do more.
What I'd like to do more. Can I make a request? And then anybody please chime in and get on my side, whoever's listening.
Or make suggestions for
I would love to do maybe on Jefferson's favorite Greek philosophers, where we can learn about how the philosophers think to understand what Jefferson took from them. Right?
We can. I'm in the process of working on a book on Jefferson and the ancients, and that was my area of specialization as a college student. Greek and Roman philosophers and scientists. So I don't know that there's any one. Maybe Cicero or Cicero should be pronounced that way. Might have been his favorite, but. So
we should do a show on Jefferson and Cicero, and what was it that he took from Cicero's writings and beliefs, and maybe learn a little bit about Cicero. That would be great.
All right, so next time we'll do Jefferson and Cicero. How's that? We'll
okay.
That.
Yay! Yay! Oh my gosh, I got my way for once. Wow!
You and your special effects and all these little things.
Aren't they cute though? Yes, everybody liked them, right?
All right, so I guess we're all done.